had this gut feeling to call him, and I didn't. And I was like, Father's Day is next month. I'll just give him a call next month. And he passed away the next morning. And I felt gutted. And I knew that something deeper was speaking to me at that time, and I didn't listen. The very first day that I ever volunteered was at the women's prison. My whole arm was shaking, and I couldn't stop it. And one of the ladies just grabbed my hand, and my goal at first was to be a public defender, and I was in court almost every day of the week, and this was probably the most difficult part of it, but I would see people up on the stand being questioned by the judge, and they were dealing with mental health issues that were so severe they had no idea they were in a courtroom. I would go home with knots in my stomach, and I knew that I had to explore this a little deeper in a different direction. My passions lie in the intersections between mental health and criminal justice. It's my goal to somehow be able to combine the two and contribute to our communities by really focusing on the drivers behind crime and really serve our people in our communities long term by healing them. And there's a quote that I like, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And so that's what drives me. I had a single mother, and it's always been just her and I, and it's wonderful. My dad was very much in the picture, just in another state. At the time, it crushed me. I didn't understand what was going on, and it just flung me into having these huge panic attacks. Even after you come out of realizing what your trauma was, things will still trigger you. It's just about how quick you regulate and get back to yourself. And so I still feel it, but I can bring myself home.
Greater Good Radio, connect, learn, heal, and grow, is brought to you by Brain Gain Hawaii, a boutique executive recruiting, career development, and coaching firm. Learn more at braingainhi.com. Welcome to Greater Good Radio. Today's guest is Katie Kaahanui, the executive coordinator from Safe and Sound Waikiki. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Evan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so that was a super short intro. Like, how would you introduce yourself?
So I am currently the executive coordinator for Safe and Sound Waikiki, but my passions lie in the intersections between mental health and criminal justice. And so my background, education-wise, is in criminal justice, but also mental health counseling. And it's my goal to somehow be able to combine the two and contribute to our communities by really focusing on the drivers behind crime, which I found a lot of the time is trauma, and how we can deconstruct that and really serve our people in our communities long term by healing them. So I thought that this position now was a great way for me to really jump into that space.
Why criminal justice? Why mental health?
So for as long as I can remember, I've been really interested in the drivers behind behavior, specifically why people choose to commit crimes. And I didn't understand why, because I don't think anybody wants to get in trouble. They don't want to get arrested or be estranged from their families, for example. But it was really fascinating to me to see it out on the streets here, and then to get really curious about what's going on in their head or their family structures and whatnot. So my goal at first was to be a public defender. And I thought that was the way that I could advocate for these people. You know, hey, maybe these people need mental health treatment. Maybe they need to go to another specific type of addiction treatment or whatnot. And I was on that path to the point where I was doing my practicum with them. And I was in court almost every day of the week and seeing the same people cycle in and out of the courtroom. And it's clear that these people are just dealing with mental health issues to me. And this was probably the most difficult part of it. But I would see people up on the stand being questioned by the judge, and they were dealing with mental health issues that were so severe they had no idea they were in a courtroom. They had no idea they were being asked questions, and they were expected to respond and, understand what's happening to them, and they didn't. And after a while, after seeing that for months and months, I would go home with knots in my stomach, and I knew that I had to explore this a little deeper in a different direction. And so I had to course correct a little bit. And I wanted to explore what life was like in prison. And so after I did my practicum, I started volunteering. I started at the women's prison in Kailua, and it was almost like everything was just answered there. I had the time and the space to really talk to the women and kind of hear their stories and the struggles that they've been through. And then I also spent time in Halava with the men and heard the exact same things from them as well. And across the table, it's just everybody is dealing with unhealed things from their childhood, and they're responding to it in ways that really almost damage their life right now. And it doesn't have to be like that to me. And so After I did my master's in criminal justice, I signed up for another master's in mental health counseling, which I'm still doing now. But I really thought that combining that would be how I can work with people just on a more intimate, person to person basis and really help them to deconstruct what they're going through and rebuild their lives in a way that's a lot more aligned with what I think their passions and their purposes in this world.
So instead of going kind of the legal route to becoming an attorney, then you went more of the healing route into the mental health masters. Is that what it was?
Yeah, and right now I would say it's kind of a mix. The work that I do right now is to advocate for people who are going through severe mental health disorders, so much so where they can't make informed decisions about how to take care of themselves or how to live. And so those are the people that we see on the streets who are they just seem like they're totally not here,
Can they have a conversation?
Not all the time. There are times where we can have a really good day and we can talk to them for 5 seconds and then they snap back into whatever they were going through. But my job right now, ironically, brings me back into the courtroom, but I'm advocating for the mental health treatment that they need. A lot of them are suffering from schizophrenia or stuff like that. And we can advocate to the judge. I can tell their story, talk about their traumas, and we can make sure that they get the help that they need that way. So that's a lot more purposeful and meaningful to me. So it's not necessarily that I didn't want to be in the courtroom. It's just I wanted more time to focus on everybody's stories one at a time.
So you're kind of looking at connection versus correction.
Yes. And that's not to say that whatever these people did does not need consequences. Sometimes they do. A lot of times they do. But I do think that once you're in the criminal justice system sometimes, that's when we can work with you. We have the time, we have the space, and we can do the healing work. But a lot of these people, they just need to become stable first, and we need to treat whatever mental illness they're experiencing.
Did they become an inmate then, or are they still in the street?
You can do it both ways. So sometimes you can work with people in prison, which is what I was doing. And so you can hold classes, you can do trainings while they're in prison. I know before I was hoping to teach a class of inmates at Aloha who were getting their bachelor's degree through Chaminade. And so that was easy because you're getting, a group of people who are driven, who want to change and who, are really focused on getting better, which was really fulfilling. But now my work is focused on the service resistant people, the people who either cannot think for themselves. When you do talk to them, they don't want any kind of help. They don't want housing. They don't want a job. But how can you form that trust with them to get them the help that they need? And so for them, we work with them on the streets. And so whether it's working with a psychiatrist who can come give them their meds on the streets, that's an option too. But treating them where they're at, meeting them where they're at, that's what I'm here for.
That sounds kind of super hard.
It is super hard. And I think, any mental health profession, it's hard not to absorb it at the end of the day. But I feel like it's just very human work. It's what we're here to do. And there's a quote that I like that, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And so that's what drives me.
So 2 things I heard in that was, one, as you take on that energy because you're in that environment, how do you have hygiene around that to be able to clear it? And then 2 is trying to help people who are severely have mental wounding that are still in unsafe places. How do you actually do healing work when it's still unsafe, the environment that you live in?
Exactly. And those are two very valid points. To answer your first question, I kind of look at it as a bubble. We each have our own bubbles. All we can control is everything we do from the top of our heads to the end of our fingertips. Everything that we do, how we show up, how we treat people, that's on us. Everything that somebody else does is completely on them, and they're seeing through whatever lens is in their bubble. Whatever color their bubble is, whatever experiences have formed what their bubble looks like, that's how they're going to show up for you, and that's not yours. So we have to remember that, because it's easy, if not, to absorb that and, break our bubble and let them come into it. And so that, unfortunately, you have to learn that through real-time practice, which I did, and it was very hard at first, but it helps. It helps a lot.
So what are you doing in order to kind of clean the day off?
Yeah, so I am very into a lot of what you mentioned before, like the spiritual practices and really making sure that I'm aligned. Before I even step out onto the streets every day in Waikiki, I like to set an intention for myself that I'm here to help these people and I'm going to show up in the best way that I can, in my best way possible, regardless of how they show up. My job is just to be there for them and to show face and to let them know that I'm here. I do think that regardless of how they present, something in them knows whether it's in their mind or in their soul. And so my job is just to be there. Whatever happens after that, I have to kind of shake off. Sometimes I have to, decompress, read, meditate, whatnot, but it's been working.
So prior to going out, then are you doing kind of a seated meditation practice, or are you just having that in your head as you go?
Oh, I do it in the car.
Oh.
Yeah, so while I'm driving to work, I try to set my intention for the day, and then I just remind myself of it before I walk out. So that's been really helpful, because if not, you can just get so caught up in, annoying traffic, not finding a parking stall at work, and then you go out, you're already annoyed, and then you might not have a lot of happy people that day, and you're just done, which happens.
How often do you have happy people that you have to deal with?
Maybe 15% of the time.
15?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's
And
more
those
than
are
I
the
was thinking.
people, a lot of times in Waikiki, I think what's unique about that district is that we have a lot of transients. We have people who are just passing through. They might be from the mainland, maybe not. But
And then they go back?
They go back. Yeah. Some people, especially during the winter months, they tend to come here because it's a lot warmer. And so they'll, fund their ticket however they can and then head back afterwards. And so a lot of those people you can talk to, you can work with. And they're open. They're like, I'm only here for a little bit. I'm cool where I am. And other people, who might be residents here, they're open to service and help, but most of them are not.
Why are you finding that they're not open to it? Do they even have the capacity or agency to know if they're open or not open?
Not all the time. I think at least the people that I'm focused on, I don't think they realize the kind of help that they need. I don't think they understand where they're at and the impact that they're having on people, which is clearly, costing them jail time, and they're getting arrested and released and, back into jail. And we're trying to stop that cycle and really make sure that they can rebuild their lives, but they're not in the right mind frame to do that just yet.
To me, how does that kind of healing and rehab work, though? Because if you're on the street, it's dangerous just being on the street. I mean, it's dangerous being indoors somewhere with other people at times. You can actually be in a safe place and not feel safe, right? So if you're actually not in a safe place, not feeling safe, how does any healing work at all? Because that's kind of the prerequisite from what I know.
I go back to that point of meeting people where they're at. And you brought up something really important. So a lot of people say that they don't want service or they don't want to go to a shelter because there's too much structure there. And there's rules and there's curfews and they're next to a lot of strangers and they don't know if they're going to get hurt, if their things are going to get stolen. And so they feel safer on the street because it's open, they can kind of have their spot and things like that. So I think figuring out where they feel most safe in the moment, that's where we meet them and then continue to work with them.
So how many people are you talking to on a daily basis?
In our community, it's different. We can have anywhere from 5 to 20, and we have a lot of regulars. And so right now I'm focused on a specific group of people who have severe mental health disorders, and I work with them. But we also have a dedicated caseworker just for Waikiki who handles everybody else. And so I'm sure her numbers are a lot higher, but mine is a little bit more concentrated.
So are you going for your licensed mental health counseling? Or?
Yes. Yeah. So after I graduate, I can take the test to be a mental health counselor.
And this counts as your hours?
No, it doesn't.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not at that point yet where I'm getting my hours. And so this is just a job opportunity that I can really just jump into things with. And I really enjoy it.
This is so different than what you did at the chamber, though.
It is in a sense. And so back at the chamber, I was in workforce development because I truly believed that education and employment are two keys to really becoming your best self. I still think that. And I do see, the amazing work that team is doing. But for me, it was also like there's something a lot deeper to that. If we're here to be our best selves at work, we still have to do the inner work and, look at the traumas that we might be dealing with and deconstruct that and rebuild ourselves to be able to show up fully at work and at school. If you're dealing with somebody who has a lot of unhealed things, they're not going to come to work on time all the time. They might not be confident enough to speak their mind in meetings. They might have conflict at work, and you just see that as poor performance, but it could be something a lot deeper. And my goal is to have managers and HR people really understand that it's a lot deeper and just to create a safe space for people to feel safe voicing that they might be going through something deeper.
The way that I define trauma is it's not what happens to us, but what happens in us as a result of what either happened to us or what should have happened but didn't, like neglect or so on.
Exactly.
Right? It's the wounds that happen inside that were overwhelming and weren't able to be kind of processed through at the time. And then now we have to protect against them, however that becomes. How are you defining it?
It's the same thing.
Same thing? Okay.
I also look at it as an unmet need, which we
Absolutely.
usually experience in our formative years that we probably don't even recognize at the time. But an unmet need that becomes this wound that is so deep that we spend the rest of our lives trying to heal that wound. No matter what it looks like on the outside in our adulthood, it's because that wasn't healed in our childhood. And a lot of people just aren't making that connection. But when you do, it's amazing. And you feel like you finally have control over your life. Because I think a lot of people feel like they're doing things or saying things that they usually feel like they wouldn't have. They have no idea where it came from. But it's just from your inner child, just trying to say that, hey, this part of me needs to be healed.
I was just actually meditating on that this morning, where I was thinking about unmet need, right? And the unmet need that drives whatever strategy at that point happens in order to fulfill that, however we'll do it, right? So let's say the unmet need is I have a need to be highly valued or to be valued. So then my strategy then becomes either, getting good grades or being good looking or funny or helpful or successful or so on, right? But then I was thinking about, I said, what lies under the unmet need? And then what I was seeing was it was typically a belief that no longer serves us. Like, I am defective. Something is wrong with me. I am bad, which is shame, right? So then my need becomes, I have a strong need to feel valued. And then my strategies can be whatever. And a lot of that is unconscious, right? We just do it and it's like, I don't know why I'm doing it. I just kind of do it. Is that kind of how you're seeing it too? Or
that makes complete sense for me. And there was something that I either read or I was watching a while ago about how when we have those thoughts, like we're defective, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we have to kind of look back and think if we were the ones that originally told that to us. Many times it's not. It was somebody else. It was a parent. It was a guardian. And we just absorbed it because the parents kind of formed the structure of the blueprint for how we're going to grow up, right, in those years. And so a lot of times it was never ours to own. It never came from us. And I think our true selves and our souls wouldn't do that to us anyways.
Well, you figure as a young child, the interpretation, even our comprehension of language is so limited and our prefrontal cortex is not developed. So what do we know other than I need my caregivers to feel I have value or I'm dead?
Yep. We know what safety feels like. We know what connection feels like. And I think those are the two big ones for young children.
Yeah. So you mentioned workforce development. So where have you seen trauma in the workplace? So my favorite quote, which I say like every show, is by Resmaa Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands. Did you read that book?
I have yet to read it, but I know it's about trauma being passed on and passed on.
In your body, right? It's how generational trauma is passed on through the body and so on. So the quote, and I might butcher it, but you know how trauma over time becomes decontextualized. You just forget about it, right? It just passes on generation to generation. You forget what was actually the cause of the wound. So trauma decontextualized in a people looks like culture. And then trauma decontextualized in a family over time looks like family traits. Trauma decontextualized in a person over time looks like a personality.
Exactly.
And then I added in trauma decontextualized in a company looks like your company culture.
That's it. That's exactly what it is.
You were in workforce development. Where did you see the most glaring example of this that nobody was really understanding except maybe you?
I think to me, and I don't think this was only at where I was working before. I think this is at many companies all over the place. But I think it's just a lack of understanding that there is something much deeper. And when we don't realize that there's something much deeper in ourselves as managers, we're going to show up and not be good managers to other people. We're going to lash out. We're not going to be, fair or understanding or empathetic towards the people that we work with. And like you said, that's going to become, the culture there. And that's going to become the norm, especially if you lead the company. And so if you're not doing your work personally, it's just going to permeate everywhere. For an employee, though, for somebody who hasn't done their work or who might not even be aware, like I was mentioning earlier, you might show up as, not on time. You might not be able to get along with anybody and you can't figure out why, even though you have this desire to do good and maybe to move up to executive leadership one day, you just can't. It's like an anchor and you're the boat and you're trying to move forward, but you can't because you don't understand what the anchor is. There was another study that I was reading not too long ago about another way that trauma shows up in the workplace, and it was chronic under-earning, which I thought was so interesting. And so, for example, somebody who doesn't really understand that they're still having their strategies and doing whatever they can to feel safe. Some people stay in the positions that are smaller and working under somebody or under a group who is making those big decisions, because that would make them feel vulnerable and that would make them feel unsafe. And so even if they're qualified, even if they're capable, even if they want to be CEO someday, they won't physically do it because they don't feel safe.
So the fear is what?
I think it's visibility. Visibility can mean that you're vulnerable to a lot of people, and it's just too much at the time to step into that space. And so you're going to stay where you are. You're going to do what's familiar. You're going to get annoyed because you're not making enough, but you don't understand why. And I think you have to really do your work, and then everything is going to change for you.
So you've mentioned multiple times doing your work. What are you defining as doing your work? And what are some examples of that?
I think it's realizing and this is the uncomfortable part when you first do it, it's when you kind of look at your life and see where you could be the problem, and where you're contributing to something that's not going good, where otherwise you might be blaming other people. But how are you showing up? How are you affecting people? How are you showing up for yourself? The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And can you go to bed every night knowing that you did a really good job and kept your integrity? And I think really just being honest and having a safe space in yourself to be like, yeah, I'm not showing up in the best way for my relationship or in my friendships or, in my workplace. But where does that come from? It's like an onion, and you can just keep going deeper and deeper. And a lot of times you'll be like, okay, I behave like this because I was criticized as a kid. And now I have to do whatever I can to be liked and to make sure that people around me approve of me. And I think that's a huge breakthrough.
I think for that, though, people have to actually go through the process, which is typically painful, which is why...
Oh, it's very painful. And
usually most people don't
usually
want to do it.
It's preceded by something bad.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
what I'm saying. The only time I know anyone who goes through that kind of work, including myself, is when there's overwhelming pain. And the pain of not doing something becomes more than the pain of doing the work.
Yeah.
That's the only time I ever see it happen.
When you feel, I think, really stuck, or when you feel like, my brain just goes back to that ship and the anchor. Like there's something holding you back. You don't know what it is. And wherever you are right now, you're not happy. You know that things are just going terrible. And from there, that usually launches it. So it's a very dark night of the soul concept, but that's usually how it starts. But when you do your work, you look back at it and it makes sense.
And that's what my friend Mickey Tomita calls being voluntold.
I like that.
Instead of volunteer, you get voluntold. Yeah, that's what happened to me.
To wake up and to awaken and to realize that you're actually a pretty supreme individual with talents and passions, and it's worth, showing up authentically to be who you are safely.
Can you share, if you're willing, a story from, the past that will give context to why you are so passionate in this area or why it's meaningful to you?
I have many, but I think going back to my childhood, I had a single mother, and, it's always been just her and I, and it's wonderful. And at the same time, I think the experience of my dad was very much in the picture, just in another state. And I didn't realize it at the time, but he had to make the best decisions that he could for himself financially. And so he had to move back home to South Dakota. At the time, it crushed me. I didn't understand what was going on. I think I was maybe 6 or 7 at the time. And it just flung me into having these huge panic attacks. And I think that's where my fear of abandonment probably came from, because I didn't understand why he left. And so I thought maybe mom would leave too. And now I'm suddenly alone. So she quickly put me into therapy, which I appreciate. And I'm 6, I really didn't understand, even what was being taught at the time, but it helped a lot. I got to have a safe person and a safe space to talk to. But also my mom and my grandma are also trained in Reiki. And so this is going to sound absolutely wild, but I got certified in level 1 Reiki when I was 8. And that was a way for them to really teach me how to ground myself and to just be more attuned with how I'm feeling and to be a little more emotionally regulative with what I was going through, and that helped me a ton. So Reiki is such a huge part of my life. I recently got level 2, but that's what helped me. Additionally, we've also seen people in our own family, as I'm sure many families do, experience addiction, homelessness, and have just seen our own families either be estranged or just not talk anymore. And that's heartbreaking, and I don't think we have enough time here during our stay on this earth to be like that. And so it really meant a lot to me to try and just restructure what families can look like if they're healed, And I think this all plays a part in that.
So does it feel then like your work, if you are able to help others to heal theirs, then almost in result, you can help yourself to heal yours?
Yeah. And I think it's the work that I do is very humbling because I'm seeing people who are going through feelings that I also went through, and I'm reminded of those feelings every time, but they're at a point where they're not talking to their kids anymore. They're estranged from, their entire families. And at the same time, we felt the same emotions, so I don't feel any different from them a lot of the times, but they're just dealing with it a little more down the road. And maybe perhaps they didn't have that chance to fully heal from it. And so I almost feel like it's a duty to show up for them and kind of guide them towards where they can be.
So in all of your work that you've done, can you share the story of when it's been the most healing for them and you?
For me, it's been most healing when you feel like you finally gained somebody's trust. And maybe that's healing for them too, actually, because nobody talks to them on the street, really. They're kind of just left on their own. But when you sit with somebody and, you have to start small. It's just walking by them every day, saying hi, getting them familiar with your face, and then having conversations with them. And a lot of times they're just waiting for that because they open up like a book. They want to share with you everything that they've been through. And from there, you can really start to form even a friendship with them. But when you feel that sense of trust from them, to me, that's very healing because I feel like that's something that they're in need of as well, if that makes sense. And from there, of course, we can, get them the right kinds of treatment. But right now, I think, at least where I am at work, it will be a transformation for me to see somebody who we advocate for in court get their mental health treatment, and then come back and they're okay. We can talk to them. We can work with them. That would be a huge win for me.
Are you close?
We have our first court hearing hopefully next month. And so my goal is to just keep working on people one at a time, and we'll go from there.
What would be a story you could share that would give us more context into the human side of what you're doing for work? Like these people are actually human too, and something that would be maybe surprising to people who don't necessarily engage in the way that you're engaging.
There's one lady that we work with. She's frequently out on the streets in a wheelchair. She is one of those people who does not want housing, who is pretty, adamant that she does not want any type of help. She loves where she is. And at face value, she looks like somebody who is just, I don't want to say an issue, but sometimes businesses complain, she's just not moving and things like that. Sometimes she's in a good mood. Sometimes she will scream at you. But she used to be a really loved fortune teller and palm reader in Waikiki back in the days. And she will tell you about that if you sit down and open up with her about it. And she loves just being in that community because that's where she feels safe. And I think that's part of how we can get to work with her, is just kind of working through that route. But these people have backgrounds and they have stories and they have kids who are just doing amazing things. But because of their unhealed trauma, they're on the streets, and at the same time we see somebody and we're like, gosh, why isn't their family reaching out or helping, but at the same time, we don't see the years and years of the help that they probably tried to give them. But everybody has such a unique story, and I'm trying to learn about all of it.
So what's the most surprising thing you noticed that others may not know about?
I think it was just a deep knowing that we're actually dealing with a mental health crisis. We're seeing people who are acting crazy getting arrested. Jail's not going to solve what they're going through and what their experiences were that led them to become that way. People refer to it sometimes as an open air asylum, which I don't always like, but sometimes that's what it is. We're seeing people out on the streets dealing with things that are hurting them, that are scaring them. And we have to, I think, approach it that way. But I think it's just surprising to look at, what's going on and being like, these are a lot of traumatized people. And that's all it is. There's a video on YouTube. I think it's called Step Inside the Circle. And it was done at one of the prisons up in California. And we had a teacher who brought a bunch of men out into the courtyard and had them stand in a wide circle. And she would say something like, okay, if you've been criticized by a parent when you were a kid, take a step forward. And everybody steps forward. And then she would say, if you've been bullied or if you've been harassed or abused, take 2 steps forward. And by the end, everybody is just, standing completely close together. And I think that says it all. We're all dealing with, some level of trauma that we're healing from. And that's the issue.
So what are you finding that you've learned in your either education or kind of clinical practices that has worked really well?
I think for me, it's about not being generalized in one thing and having as wide a variety of experience as you can. And so I found through my journey that being in workforce development helped me to realize that we have to deal with a criminal justice and a mental health issue. And how can I do, what I can and learn what I can to be able to help in a bunch of different ways? I think that's how I can be most effective.
Okay, so if you were in a company now, like as the company, either HR or, leadership, what would be the first things that you would do?
Trying to make some model of authentic company culture and authentic leadership. And that means working with managers and senior execs to make sure that, they're in a good space mentally. I think corporate wellness with your leaders is really important, but to understand that their employees are also people going through things as well. And maybe to treat them when they first come on is that they have this desire to do good. They want to be well. And I'm sure everybody shares that in their interviews, right? But, when you work with them and you see how they perform over time, you can kind of tell if something's going on. But to create a safe space for them to maybe talk about it, when you have your one-on-ones. And I'm not saying to have your one-on-ones and try and revisit their childhoods with them, but to make them feel safe to share. And I think that will help retention. I think that will help company culture overall. And I think that will help people develop into good leaders themselves because they've been treated that way.
How would the leadership or employee do that if they're not aware of it themselves, in themselves?
Yeah, I think executive coaching is a good way to do that too. I think we're well overdue to have these kinds of talks in the workplace, and leading the mental health podcast for the chamber was something that I did to try and open that door. But I think it's time for our leaders here, people who have such wide and deep influence to be able to kind of scan what's going on with them and how they're showing up. And that's gonna change a lot.
Is what you're saying that for leadership out there, they need to kind of do a U-turn and look at themselves right now, even if they don't want to?
Yep. Maybe not a U-turn, maybe just a pause and just look at everything that maybe you may have shied away from for years and kind of look at why you think the way you do, why you show up the way you do, why your values of maybe being seen as successful, and super impactful and highly visible in the community, why those are values to you, what's below that, and just go from there.
For those, what would you say is the most common value below that? Why would those be their values?
Perhaps it could be something like a lack of feeling seen for whatever reason in childhood, and that's not for everyone, of course, but a lack of feeling seen, a lot of times people who show up with workplace trauma have been teased and bullied at school. And so that's why you need to excel. That's why you need to be perfect. That's why you need to be better than everyone. So you're kind of untouchable from the judgment. But it could be anything like that. And I think over time, you just get bogged down with your work and your duties, and you don't realize that's actually what the issue is.
To me, I kind of find that the core wounding is typically shame-inducing, right? I am bad. Something's wrong with me. I am defective. And it's a moral kind of judgment, right? So it's a verb. Somebody is shaming, passing that moral judgment of bad or wrong, right? So good, everybody wants to be good and wants to be right. Nobody wants to be bad or wants to be wrong. But taking it to the level where it's so painful to be bad or wrong that I'll do anything not to be that.
That's very true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Because I deal with a lot of leadership as well as people who own stuff. And typically to get there, the driving force is shame. I'm never feeling like that again. Nobody's going to show me again. I will prove it to them or so on. And then that kind of fuel, which is, really strong, like rocket fuel, gets you out of the atmosphere into orbit. But as we get older, some stuff starts to break down. And then when you realize, whoa, pain's still there. Crap, I can't really accomplish my way out of this anymore. Now I got problems.
I think you can only go so far with that type of mindset and lifestyle. And life is going to do something that's going to wake you up. And you're going to be in a position where you might not necessarily be at rock bottom, but you're going to be in a place where you are forced to reevaluate things and rebuild from there because you have to be taught that lesson. But yeah, I think that there comes a point for all of our lives that we are forced through some force or some event out of our control that really, makes us kind of sit down and have to do that work, even though we didn't want to or we didn't sign up for it.
Okay, so step one then, somebody says, okay, I buy into this. I'm willing to do this kind of work. What kind of work are you talking about? What's my first step? I do what?
I think for most people, it's figuring out why you're in that position right now. You
On
know,
my own, on their own.
you can do it on your own. My
So
goal is
hard.
that people know that there's help,
Yeah.
but I had to do that work on my own. I think many people
You did it on
do.
your own without like help?
I knew Reiki at the time, but that's not all that there is to it. I had to read a lot of books. I had to listen to a lot of things. I had to practice things for the first time and really kind of walk myself through a lot of the hurts that I was going through. And I have no regrets about it because I think it only brought me closer to myself, and I'm proud. I think even more proud that I did it myself. But I think it's kind of reevaluating where you are, why you're so unhappy, and you're at a point where you can do nothing but really brainstorm how to change that.
Was that a lonely process then?
It
If you're
can.
going through it on your
It
own?
can be, but I'm also an only child and I like deep thought and solitude. So for me, it was okay.
You
But I
like it or you're used to it?
both. I enjoy solitude where I'm not lonely. I don't consider myself lonely. I just enjoy it. And I think it's my space to rethink and charge and to, kind of recalibrate myself.
Like how long in solitude? Like how long?
Definitely
How
not every day.
often?
Yeah, a lot of my job is interfacing with people too, and that fills me up. But I'm not afraid to be alone, and alone with my own thoughts too. That's a big thing. I think a lot
Have
of
you always been like that?
I have.
Okay.
I have. And I think it's helped me in many ways, but I also had to acclimate to, big work environments. And, my old job, we were constantly working with people and big meetings and big events. And so I had to get used to that. But there was one thing that I read, that being an introvert is that you are okay with who you are and you are safe no matter if you're by yourself or with 100 people. You just know how you recharge. That's it. Being an introvert doesn't mean that you have to leave that party. You can just be mindful of where your battery's at.
Do you find though that being an introvert really kind of means it's just where you feel safe? Because people who would say I'm introverted in certain circumstances and situations, they would be considered extroverted.
Yep, I do. I think it's just a way to explain how you recharge. For me, I love working with people. I love having that one-to-one connection, but too much, I feel drained. And so I need to kind of revert back to just myself, my space, and I'm good. But I think people might use it as a crutch. Like, oh, I'm introverted, so I really don't want to do that public speaking gig. I don't want to do this. I'm not equipped for this because I'm an introvert. I think we can move past that.
I think for that one though, that leads to shame again. For that one. That's fear of judgment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you did the podcast for the Chamber in Mental Health, how did that come about?
So the timing worked out great. I was just jumping into my new master's program, and it was also Mental Health Awareness Month. And I just wanted to do something a little different because I felt that mental health in the workplace is not talked about enough, but it's so prevalent that we probably all are feeling it to some extent. And so I pitched the idea to our CEO, who luckily was completely on board with it, and we ran with it. So I got to be really intentional about who I invited. So we wanted to touch on mental health in the corporate space. We touched on domestic violence, for example, and how prevalent that is, not only in the island, but in the state, which means that it's in our workplaces, and also how you can just be more mindful of how you're showing up individually. We still had a lot of stuff to touch on, and I still think there's a lot of excavating to do there, but it was a good start and it opened a door.
What were your main takeaways from that?
I think it's that it's comforting to see how many CEOs and people in leadership are comfortable to talk about it. It may have been the first time that they've really talked and, sat with themselves in that space and to just kind of share something out loud. But it starts with them. If you're leading a company, it really starts with you. And so I was happy to kind of offer that platform and have that discussion with them that we could share with people.
You found that they were open to it because they were guests on the show, or they would give you feedback after? How did you find that out?
It was a feeling. It started with a feeling that they were really excited to be on. But once you heard them talk, you could hear that they have their own spheres, right? In the office, in the domestic violence space. We also interviewed people who do mental health and resilience for the state, and then also personally. But everybody was so passionate about their space, and they wanted people to get that and to learn more about it too. And so I think it was just the knowing that these people are kind of on the same page, but to offer the chance for people to share that. And they were so grateful. So the thank yous also helped a lot too.
So what either strategy, skills, techniques, insights came out of that were the most important to you?
I think it's that we're all working in our own little spheres, But if we aren't so siloed and we all come together, I think that really big transformation can happen. But it's going to take those conversations, and it's going to take continued conversations and continued work together. And perhaps it's, jumping into teaching space or training space for executives, but we can all play a part. And I think we're at that point, especially coming out of the pandemic, and the fires and a lot of the things that we're going through. Mental health is important, and it's time to talk about it. And there's people who are ready, but we need to come together and actually do it.
So how would you define mental health?
I think it's whole body wellness, spiritual, physical, emotional, and also just really doing what you can to be aligned and regulated.
So in a company situation, what are some strategies or offerings that you've seen work and work well?
Gosh, for as long as I can remember, there's been the employee assistance program where people can have access to whatever type of therapy that they might need. That's been there, but the utilization of it hasn't been, super high. And so I think it's starting with the conversations that this is a safe space to talk about things that you're going through, maybe incorporating events or trainings into your own workplace and make it regular, that focusing on who you are physically, mentally, emotionally outside of the workplace is one thing, but bring who you are authentically to work. It's okay. And we can all work with you from there. So it's a big process, especially if you're dealing with a large company, but it's really the restructuring that I think is needed to make impactful change.
When you mentioned Reiki, right? Like what specifically about Reiki was healing for you?
Well, for me, learning it as young as I did, it was really comforting to me with my anxiety. It brought me back to myself. And I think, with anxiety, you are focused on the future. You're focused on things that can go wrong later on or possibilities that might be harmful or hurtful to you. A Reiki brought me back, and it's just getting me back in tune with who I am, where my body's at, where it might need attention. And that's what I really loved about it. But now it's just a way for me to remember that we're all very spiritual, and we're all very energetic, and we can do whatever we can to balance that and show up well.
So how would you explain Reiki to people who don't know what it is?
I would say in layman's terms, it's energetic healing focused on where specifically somebody might need help. It focuses a lot on your chakras, but from there we can kind of pick up where somebody is energetically, kind of like their energetic pulse, and work from there to heal it. And so if you have bad things going on, we can remove it, or we can make sure that you're getting the love that you need in certain places.
So when you were doing Reiki, you were self-administering Reiki on yourself, or your mother or grandmother were doing it on you? All of it? What were you doing?
All of it. Mostly when I was younger, I was the recipient of it during anxiety attacks from grandma, which helped a lot. But now that I have level 2, I'm more interested in doing it on other people. And so I think that's something that when I have time, I'll pursue that.
Do you still get the anxiety attacks?
It pops up here and there. I don't think it'll ever leave. But I think the whole goal of it, even after, you come out of realizing what your trauma was, things will still trigger you. It's just about how quick you regulate and get back to yourself. And so I still feel it, but I can bring myself home.
Why did you choose the mental health counseling versus social work or, something else within that genre?
I thought mental health counseling would allow me the opportunity to really work with people one-on-one for their specific mental health needs. The job that I do now, I'm on the streets, I'm working with people, and we're dealing with work that is setting people up with their case managers and pretty similar to what I feel a social worker would have done. But I feel like the mental health counseling license allows me a little more opportunity to maybe start my own thing later, or, just continue working with people and using what I know to help them on the streets.
And then what therapeutic models do you like the best?
Reiki is always good. Breathwork is another one. And I actually did my first breathwork session during my Reiki training, which was a great experience. It was part of our attunement that we had to do that. Mm-hmm. So I found a lot of joy in it. It's really interesting the very first time you do it, but that's another way to just get in tune with who you are. And I know you have a lot to say on that.
No, what kind of breath work are you talking about? Because breath work is pretty wide open, like meditation or exercise or so on.
It was a breathwork meditation. And so ironically, the woman who attuned me in Reiki is also a DJ. And so she specifically would curate these playlists that we would meditate to, and she would do a guided breathwork session while we were lying down. And that was wonderful. And so I thought that, really getting in tune with who I am breath-wise is another way to regulate myself.
What type of breathing though? You're doing like box breathing, you were doing like holotropic breathing. What kind of?
Mostly
How was it?
box breathing. Yeah, there's still a lot that I have
Like
to
four,
even
four,
yet
four,
try.
four?
Yes.
4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4.
And then sometimes I feel like she would go a little faster, but I think that's what it was mostly.
So you like somatic practices.
I do.
Right? Body-based practices.
Yeah, for me personally, when I hold stress, I feel it somatically, and so I have to release it somatically. And so I'm really interested in that for regulation.
You ever studied somatic experiencing?
Not yet.
Have you heard of it?
No.
SE. It's super popular. It's great. Yeah. Somatic Experiencing by Peter Levine.
Okay.
It's basically how trauma is held in the body and then how to utilize the body to kind of let it go.
I remember there was a conversation I was having with the group of inmates at Aloha, and they were teaching me all about the vagus nerve and how that's what you need to regulate if you're expecting to heal your trauma physically. And then from there, you can heal it emotionally. But to hear it from them, people who they get it, they're learning about it, but they just need the chance to go and practice it was really amazing for me.
I wonder if they're talking about like vagal nerve, like stimulation or like, so vagus nerve, my understanding is the nerve, it looks like a tree, like roots.
Yes. And it just connects
everything in your autonomic nervous system, right? So everything that's unconscious, it connects, right? All your organs and everything else. So have you gone through polyvagal theory?
Yes.
Right? So where it's ventral, vagal, sympathetic, and then dorsal, right? So it's basically you're relaxed and socially engaged, or you go into flight or fight, and then you move into freeze, right? And then it's like a ladder and you move kind of up and down. Somatic experiencing, in my understanding, helps somebody to kind of move through that smoothly so they can release what's held in the body. Because I think he showed, I don't know if it was a tiger or some type of an animal. So that you watch animals and they get chased. I think it was a gazelle or something was getting chased by the lion. And then once it got away,
they're fine.
But it had to shake it out. It shakes it out like a dog does, you know what I mean? Shakes it out. But humans, we don't typically shake it out. It'll get stuck inside of our body. So we have to be able to let it out.
That's interesting. I heard that before, but I heard that after somebody gets chased or after they have this really scary experience, they just go back on to grazing or to what their life was before that fear. That makes sense. And I feel like that is exactly what happens to humans too.
Yeah.
I tend to freeze. My trauma response is to freeze. And so I think the somatic release is especially helpful for that.
Well, the freeze makes sense, right? Because if once danger is
kind of
noticed, you either can run or you can fight, right? But if you cannot run or you cannot fight, then you move into freeze. So it shows that for animals, it's called death feigning. So like reptiles, like a turtle or a lizard, when they go into that kind of state, they look dead. They'll stop breathing. They're not moving anymore. And then like half an hour later, when there's no more danger, they'll like, and then just run away. So humans can't do that. We have to breathe. So what we'll do in our nervous system is we'll move into freeze, but that means that we'll dissociate as well. Like our minds will come out and we'll just be zoned out, right? And that is helpful in the short term, but not really helpful in the long term. It becomes a problem.
Exactly.
Right? So yeah, I think you might like somatic experiencing.
I'm interested in learning more. Thank you for sharing it with me.
Yeah. So have you heard of brain spotting?
No, that's what I wanted to ask you about earlier when you mentioned it.
So brain spotting is, I just describe it almost as like EMDR 2.0.
Okay.
Right? So are you familiar with EMDR? Right? So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So using like bilateral stimulation in order to kind of calm the nervous system down, which is very protocol based. You follow the exact protocol and so on. Brain spotting is a bit different. The guy who started, his name is Dr. David Grand, and he was training in EMDR. And what he did was he was doing the kind of the bilateral movements with figure skater, and he just stopped at one point, and she was locked onto it, and then she just started processing, and then I think maybe some somatic things were going on in her body. She couldn't do a triple loop before that, but after that session was done, she could do a triple loop, and there was all this traumatic stuff that was stuck in her that was able to process and kind of clear out, and then it was done. So brain spotting, kind of the theory is that inside the brain, Because, if this is your brainstem, and then right here you have the reptilian part of the brain, and then you have the limbic system, which is the mammalian part of the brain, right, where we hold all the emotions and everything. And then on top is the neocortex, which is all our higher processes, math and things that make us human and so on. But all the trauma typically is held in here. So when the eyes are formed, the eye is actually part of your brain. It's connected directly into there. So there's a certain relevant eye position, like where the eye is actually looking, that holds this file system open in the limbic system area of where the trauma is actually held. And by holding that open, you can actually allow it to process.
Interesting. And the people who are doing these trainings, are they just certified on their own? Are they mental health counselors or?
The actual brain spotting trainings are done typically by licensed professionals. So, LMFT or LPC or licensed social worker or so on. You could do a level 1 online, phase 1 online. And this one is called expansion. So typically in brain spotting, a lot of times we're going through kind of an activated, somebody's activated, they are triggered, for lack of a better word. And we're entering to that kind of trauma area through that, or trying to do it through a more kind of grounded state, a more resource state. But a lot of times that's more painful, right? So expansion is really about determining where do you want to be and your desired outcome, and then entering into the brain spotting from there.
That's interesting.
So it's less painful in my experience.
Well, it's a form of safety, and I think you know what the outcome is going to be, or at least where this is going to take you, which I think makes it feel safer for you.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Have you heard of internal family systems, or IFS?
Yes. And I think that's a big part of, the change that I hope happens to a lot of people and a lot of family structures here, but everything is connected.
So IFS is another really fast growing therapy model. I'm trained in that. I use it quite a bit. And it goes on the premise that we all have parts of us, right? Part of me is excited to be here today, and part of me feels like I should be doing something else, or part of me is worried about what people are going to think, and so on, right? And then all the parts have various roles. Typically, one, it holds a wound. That's the one that holds the burden of, I am bad, or I lost something, or something, holds the pain.
That's like fragmentation.
It would be
parts work. Okay.
It's parts work. And then the other parts are protective parts. So that whenever that part that holds the wound comes up, the pain of that comes up at the exact same time, in the exact same way, in the exact same intensity. And then the protective parts need to either shut it down or distract or numb it out. And they'll do it either proactively by, managing somebody's life and making sure that we're good boys and good girls and so on. Or it'll be all the reactive stuff, which is what you're seeing on the street, the violence, any isms. And then when you take all of those, we also have the self, or the soul, or spirit, what you come in with at birth and what you leave with at death. It doesn't need to be taught anything, and there's no way it gets hurt, except that when the protective parts keep jumping in, you don't know it's there. Like today, where the clouds are covering the sky. If they did that all year, you would think there's no sky. There's sky, it's just covered by clouds.
I think it's hard at first when you're aware of fragmentation, and I think all the different, places that, or the ways that you can split up into your protective parts, to realize that they all serve you and that they all have your best interest in mind.
Absolutely.
Even though some are completely destructive, it's still here to protect you. That's a hard one to grasp, I think. But
that's a core premise in internal family systems, is that all parts have good intentions.
They all love you,
irregardless of their impact. Like even suicidal part, which is,
escaping pain, wanting to feel peace.
It just wants you to be protected, and it doesn't want to do that. But if you can't handle or so on, then it's willing to kind of do that.
I think that's what I'm seeing on the streets a lot, is just some version of a person who was just acting so loudly and so vibrantly, and that's all we see. But there's so many other parts, and this is just the part of them that's trying to keep them safe in this moment.
So in IFS, we'll call it the firefighter, the reactive one. It's like, if there's a fire, I'm going to put it out. It doesn't matter if I destroy everything in that house, but the fire is going out. Unfortunately, that's kind of what happens a lot of times. It's destructive.
So fascinating. I think, to go back to your question about why I chose mental health counseling, I feel like the license in it allowed me a little more, space and opportunity to be able to dive into those types of trainings for somatic stuff that you were mentioning. Whereas I don't think a social worker necessarily would be able to do that. Or if they wanted to, they could, but not necessarily. So I like that part. And that reminds me of a really interesting conversation that I had with the psychiatrist that we work with. And I was talking with him and I was like, sometimes I feel a block in this work because all I can do is talk with people. I can work through their problems verbally with them, but say they need medication for some really severe mental health issue. I can't prescribe for that. And I feel a block sometimes. And he was like, I feel a block because all I can do is prescribe. I can't walk through people with things. It's my job to give them the medicine they need. And so he's like, you're doing a job, I'm doing a job, but we have to all do it together. And so that was a big thing for me too.
Well, the thing about that too is that, it's going to be held in the body because, that's what we have.
Yeah.
And that's what we kind of reside in. The hard thing with that is that a lot of times wounds, they don't have words. They're pre-verbal, right? You get emotional wound as a child, typically, I would say under even like 8, 9 years old.
Yep, up
you
to
don't
8.
have words.
Up to 8. That's the time where it's most impactful to you, and we have no idea.
But you have no words, right? 2 years old, you're doing something, you get a scolding, and you don't know why, can't make sense of it. All you know is, something's wrong. If my fault, I'm bad. That gets locked in there because you weren't able to express it properly so it can kind of process its way through. That's stuck in there. Anytime that comes up now, there's not going to be words for that. There's only going to be feelings. There's only going to be
reactions.
Bodies. Yeah, it's going to be like, I don't know why I do this. And then you say, well, let's talk about it. And there's nothing to talk about. There's no words.
Yep. And I think a lot of time we can't go back to that moment because we don't remember it. When we were a baby and we felt this fear and it stuck and it became a part of the blueprint.
Although in like brain spotting as well as IFS, other kind of modalities too, you will
it might
remember.
Be possible.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, you'll be like, I know what, this doesn't make any sense, but oh my gosh, this is what's happening. But it feels fully real and this is familiar and so on. Then now you can help it to process through and express itself how it needs to.
That's great.
To be done. Yeah. So how many more years do you have?
1.5 years if I continue on time and, do my summers and not take any breaks. So
and then thousands
that's
of
the
hours
plan.
of
yes, and then the hours
work.
begin. So that's, I would say, another year, 2 years maybe.
So then would your work now count?
I was never planning for it to be, so I'm not sure. But I think it equips me more than, somebody who's not doing this kind of work already. So I'm enjoying it.
You find that people that are incarcerated are more open to you coming in, helping them, or a lot of
both? I think with the people who are in specific classes, they're choosing to be there. So you're already working with people who are open to it, right? You can see the people who are not, and they're not the ones who are choosing to work with you. And that's okay. That's okay. Maybe they're not there yet. But the ones who are ready, they are ready. And they are ready to turn their lives around and learn and even kind of call themselves out on what's been going on. And that's really been purposeful to me.
The biggest transformation that you've seen in that system?
For somebody to get their degree. From somebody who hasn't even graduated high school or gotten a GED to go all the way to do the work. College is a commitment, and a lot of times during that period, they almost quit because they didn't get the score that they wanted on a test and they were done. But we had to persevere together. They helped each other out a lot. They, gave a lot of encouragement. And then to see them in their gowns with their diplomas, even though a lot of them might never get out, some are doing life sentences, but they're here to heal themselves and maybe change what their family structure was before, even if it's just for themselves, was really nice to see.
So you find that they're pretty collaborative then?
For the most part, yeah. Huh. Yeah. You also see the very real things, the anger, the why am I here? Why am I doing this? This is stupid. Why are you here? Sometimes. But most times they're very open, and it takes the team continuing to be there for each other for that to go well.
You ever been super scared?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the very first day that I ever volunteered was at the women's prison. And although I was there and it felt like a resounding yes to me, I was in the classroom and I was passing out papers and my whole arm was shaking. And I couldn't stop it. It was just shaking. And one of the ladies just grabbed my hand and she held onto it. And she kind of helped me to regulate. She didn't say a word. I didn't say anything to her either. But
you mean one of the inmates?
Mm-hmm. Mm. She knew. And she held my hand until I calmed down. And then she just nodded at me. And then we just had the class. I will always remember that. But I never had that happen to me since then.
Is that person still in prison?
I'm not sure. Oh. I'm not sure. Yeah. People there, they could be serving sentences varying. So I'm not sure.
Before we got into this, you had mentioned that in your podcast, you would want to go a little bit deeper into certain subjects. What subjects would those be? Would that be something that you want to discuss now?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure how open people would be to this, especially executives, but for them to dive into their own traumas and things that they've experienced and hard things that they've been through that really force them to wake up. Or if they're not there yet, to sit with them and give them that safe space to do the work, but to really have them deconstruct and open up and share it publicly, that they're just as human as everybody else. I think, especially in the work corporate structure, it seems very siloed and very separate sometimes, and that there's just this whole upper generation of people, but it's really not. We're all human. We're all going through things, and I want people to know that. And I want people to really have those hard conversations and be ugly and cry and do the work, and
So
in
you
front
want
of your
like
team.
a therapy session on camera?
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's my next thing once I get licensed.
I tell you, the hard thing on that is that there's a vulnerability hangover the next day and after.
Should I have done that? Was that smart?
Yeah, like, oh crap, I did that, and then I'll tell you, the danger of that is there's potential to open something up that they may not have the support around them or the ability to deal with after.
That's very true. Perhaps private therapy would be good for that too. But I mean, it's the same.
They would have to have a support around it, because if it's just one time, it's like, okay. And then after this,
and now
what
all
do I
these
do?
doors are open, you're exposed.
Yeah, it's
and
like
now
starting surgery, but you don't finish it.
No, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that working with an executive on that kind of work is the exact same work you would do with someone on the streets. It's the same emotions that you might have to be unpacking. We're no different.
Well, I find that executive level people typically have very intense unresolved trauma that is not necessarily being discussed, nor do they want to discuss it. So until they have to figure it out. Nobody wants to really open up that until they have to.
I just wish it wasn't after complaints, or after people leave and you realize that, hey, this place isn't running smooth.
That's
What's
just how
going
it goes,
on?
I think, a lot of times, which is the hard work is hard for a reason, and scary then at that too. I mean, I do a lot of this kind of work. I hold the space in that a lot. And so I'm talking from experience on it. It's a tough one, because as the leader of the organization, you have to show some strength so you can lead it. And then there's always a thought of, are they going to feel that I'm kind of weaker, which could be or could not be. And I don't want to be taken advantage depending on what the wounding was coming up, right? There's a difference in terms of like, something's wrong with me versus I don't want to be abandoned. They're all painful, but there's differences in how somebody's going to protect kind of against that. And I think what I found for executive level people that I deal with, there has to be really, really safe environment that can be continued. Otherwise, it's just not possible. I've seen where they know something, but it's like their system won't even let them get near it.
Exactly.
It just won't do it.
That makes sense.
I don't know if you saw it when I did the interview with Sarah. And I was talking about the Connected Leader workshop, because initially my whole piece was like, okay, we're going to do these workshops. I was thinking exactly what you're thinking, which is we're going to go start digging into our traumas, and we're going to work with unresolved traumas, because that's really what makes sense, right? You take the core issue and you go to the root cause issue, and then you resolve it, and then everything else kind of clears up. But then I was finding that, wow, everybody's scared of this subject, and, people are kind of like, oh, somebody else kind of thing, because those would typically need to be private moments. But now as I'm figuring out like this Connected Leader workshop, which is about having that connection with yourself, right? Being strong and stable and healthy. And then the connection between me and others, you and somebody else, in dyads, like two people. And then between the group, right? Us. Like,
we're completely on the same page.
What would be the offering that doesn't take a group too deep? Because here's the thing. This is the thing I've noticed really clearly. Someone like you and me, what we consider deep is existentially deep for somebody else. And maybe even vice versa for certain amounts of people. But what I consider shallow, people are like, holy cow, that's so deep. And it's like, oh, we lose track. You know what I mean? So
I wonder if you focus on the individual, so the leader, and their relationship with themselves. And from there, that will spread out into how they treat other peoples in the group. I think if you can focus on creating an enlightened leader, that might just permeate in the ways that you hope to, but just focus on that person first, which is why I think individual mental health counseling is so impactful, because it starts with you. It was you all the time,
I do that in coaching, but the thing with coaching is it's limited, right? It's one person. They typically can afford it because it's not cheap.
Right.
So how do you do that in an organizational level or with multiple people in a way that's meaningful, but also doesn't lead us into where we might have an abreaction, with multiple people at the same time without the right support and services needed for that. You know how it goes. It's like brain spotting has a saying that's like, I may not know what it is, but I know that it is. It's like something's up. I don't know exactly what this is, but something is up.
That was what I was talking about before. When you can spot in your team that somebody's going through something, you don't have to know exactly what it is, but name it and maybe we can work through it together safely.
And maybe it's time to just say, I'm cool with this, and maybe we get you additional help on that. Because a lot of times the manager or the senior leader or whatever, they don't want to be the therapist. Nor
is it their job.
And nor can they a lot of times. You know what I mean? I mean, it's one thing to know that, okay, my boss cares about me. It's another, like, this is going to be my full emotional support. That is a huge responsibility, as well as they might not be qualified or skilled.
Right.
Capable.
I think just to name that something's going on and to remind them that they're safe to walk through it, here are the ways that we can handle it, might work wonders. Something as simple as that.
Just like, hey, how are you doing? You okay? And then the tricky part about that too is you got to make sure you are fully compliant with HR laws, that you're not, breaking any of those, which means you're limited in what you can kind of inquire about, which makes it a little bit tougher.
I'm glad we're on the same page with a lot of things.
For over a year, I was talking with others, probably 2 years, about, okay, here's a piece. It's unresolved trauma. It's unresolved trauma. But anytime it's an organizational person, like, well, what are we doing? Why are we doing this in a group? You know what I mean? You might have a group there consisting of people that hate each other, which means then you have to get everybody at least connected and communicating at least at a base level before you can get anything else kind of done. You know what I mean? So, and we're not even moving into the trauma healing portion, which would be kind of a healing group. You just skipped over the whole individual part, and now you're just dealing into workplace cultures. So that can be tough in itself, I feel. That would be super tough. Yeah, that's why I'm trying to figure is like, how does this work? How does this work where people are actually willing to do it and it can be done in a safe and responsible way? I don't know.
It's important work, though. Worth pursuing, for sure.
Because I got to tell you, between us kind of thing, it's like, there's so many times I'm like, dude, why am I doing this? Like, why do I even do this? Why do I even care about doing this? I don't freaking do this. Like, is anyone even coming?
Wemaybe your work is really fully showing up for the folks that do show up. That's it. You're not here to convince the people who aren't ready. That's not our job. That's their bubble. We're here for people who are ready to be here.
Well, that's what I have to embrace on it, right? And the other piece that has been an interesting journey for me has been that it's not necessarily a moral reflection on myself.
Exactly.
Whether people register or don't register, or I feel that they got something out of it or didn't, is not a moral judgment on my self-value.
Or the worthiness of what you're offering.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I feel like we're starting to step into a space where we're diving into the unknown and the uncomfortable, especially as it pertains to workplace culture, but it's so needed. And I wish more of it would happen, but I think the conversations will get people ready to be willing to do it or try it. And that's a win for me right now.
So do you still talk to your father?
So he passed away when I was 19.
Oh.
Yeah. And I think, a big part of that was during that time, we were not communicating as much as I had wished. And I was 19, I was just starting college. I was experiencing this whole new chapter of life and was not keeping in touch with him as much as I wish I did. And I remember, I think this was actually the night before he passed away, I had this gut feeling to call him. And something told me to give him a call, and I didn't. I was here in Hawaii. He was in South Dakota. I was like, you know what? The hours, the hour difference is too big right now anyways. It was May at the time, and I was like, Father's Day is next month. I'll just give him a call next month. And he passed away the next morning, and I felt gutted. And I knew that, something deeper was speaking to me at that time, and I didn't listen. And so forgiving that part of me is something that took years to do. But it's weird saying this, but I think our connection is deeper now. And I think knowing that he is here, he's everywhere, and, accessible wherever I am makes me feel comforted. And I think we're closer now than we ever were physically.
So what did you do in order to be able to forgive yourself and heal from that?
Gosh, well, it took years. It's not something that happened right away, of course. I think it's also learning about his story and that he was obviously going through things himself. And I think he felt a lot of guilt, for having to kind of leave quickly. But I understand that. And once I forgave him, it was a little easier to forgive my reactions to that, which caused why I chose not to call. And so that took years, but I understand it. and it's okay. And I think, I don't have kids right now, but when it does happen, it reminds me how I want to show up for them and, let them know that it's always safe to talk about whatever you want and call anytime, stuff like that.
So the Kaahanui name, is that from your mother?
Dad.
That's from,
Yeah.
So he's Hawaiian, but he lived in South Dakota?
Yeah, so he was also Sioux. He was Native American. And so my grandma, who was mostly Native American, they're all from upper South Dakota. And so he wanted to go back to where he grew up, ironically, which was up there. And he was back and forth growing up, but split between here.
So he's Native American and Hawaiian?
Yes.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Have you ever done any work or research into ancestral healing?
It's prevalent in both big time. And so I haven't dived into it just yet, but to think about how you can start there, with a culture, and then to kind of work your way back to why you are the way you are individually.
You're talking about two people that their entire land in a violent way stripped away culture and so on, comprising basically your father, right?
Exactly. And so I know that's a huge part of the work that I still have to do in this lifetime, which I am fully committed to, but I know it's going to be big work.
So there's a guy, his name is Daniel Foor, Foor. He does ancestral healing programs. It's either ancestral medicine or ancestralhealing.org, I think, or .com. Daniel Foor.
Okay.
I did that last year. It was like over a 3-month period where you basically go in and he's teaching and you're working you can add on this kind of piece where you work as a cohort also to heal up your family lines. Because a lot of times that's the stuff that's invisible, man. Like you won't be able like, oh, this happened when I was 4th grade because something. No, this is stuff that's 19 generations ago that you have zero idea about and is purely energetic at this point, but it still affects you. So on the ancestral one, I thought it's almost like a deep cleaning to an extent. So here's an interesting one. So my father, who was really sick off and on because he had cancer, right? He had leukemia and he survived for 9 years. He just passed away this last year, but he had so many extra years on that. He was really sick during that time. And he was throwing up every single day. Couldn't hold down food. And we're like, oh gosh, here it goes. This is the end, which we've had kind of a lot of them. But it was like, oh, this is the end. I did the ancestral healing program, which was like 3 months or so. And it was hard for me because part of it, you're dealing a lot with spiritual guides, ancestral guides. And the hard thing that I had was which one is actually well, which one is not well. How do you discern on this? I was having such a hard time on that. But once I finished it and was done, could be a coincidence, whatever. My dad stopped throwing up that day and lived for another, year or two or so. Was it last year I did? I either did last year or the year before. Yeah. So, but what it does
believe in it
nicely
wholly.
too is it cuts kind of that generational energetic trauma that gets passed down. It's said and done. It's done.
I feel like that's personally what my goal is for myself. And it's a big taking on, but I think that's what I'm here to do. And I'm trying to do that whichever way I can.
It's a big responsibility, but hey, only one has to do it in your family to get it done. Yeah. You've already done a lot of work. I can give you more info on that after if you want.
Thank you.
Yeah. I thought it was super helpful.
That sounds really interesting. I know part of healing from, the situation with my dad was starting to see a lot of spiritual leaders who I trusted in to see if they could connect with him. And I did that for a while. And there's one person that I go to and she's wonderful, but you know that something's different when they start talking like how this person did, or they bring up jokes that this person would say, or, they would say things that there's no way that they could have known that, but that's how she was. And she shared with me that he felt really bad about what our relationship was like here, and that he wanted to say sorry for not being as present of a father, but that he is still learning. They go to the next world and they're learning. It's almost like they go back to school and he's still learning what he had, whatever work he still had to do. And he is more present now and he's a better version of himself, which I just thought was so fascinating. And, spiritually, there's no distance, he's here. And I hold that with me every day.
From what I was, taught or learned and so on, is there's a difference between when somebody passes and their spirit moves to the kind of the next level, and then being an ancestor, like a go. I don't know what the wording is, like ghost or spirit, and then becomes an ancestor.
That's just wise.
Right, because at that point, they're benevolent, they're wise, they're able to help. And there's somewhere along the that kind of like genealogical like family tree where it goes awry. And then from there, it's like from that point on. So in the ancestral healing, you're typically moving up high enough to get in touch with a what they call a well ancestor.
That
And
makes
then you
so
work
much
with
sense.
there, and then you have, and then basically that well ancestors helps create more or less like an energetic cocoon for everyone else in there until that healing stuff is done. From there down to you, and then becomes, you know, your siblings, or if you have siblings or whatever, you know, and so on. And then when that's all said and done, then that line is kind of done, and then you're moving to a different kind of line. So line meaning like women in this line, right? Women, or males in your father's line or something, right? So
Oh,
yeah,
that's fascinating.
yeah. So
And that's what I was told too, that you want to be sure who you're connecting with, because everybody is still
see, that's
at
the hard.
different
That was the
levels
piece I was having a hard time with.
and learning what they still have to learn, and they might not even be at a space where
That's the hard piece, because and this is where you get like into shamanism, right? So have you heard of shamanism, right? The oldest kind of spiritual practice in the world. Shamanism, you are talking about multiple worlds, right? So we're talking about like middle world, which is kind of where we're at, where spirits can kind of do things and they can kind of be trickery and so on. But when you go to the lower world, which just means like lower, like kind of under the surface, it's just down there. There isn't any. So you would actually go and you journey to the lower world, and then you could communicate over there, and there's less trickery. Or you could go to the upper world, but it's not really like linear. It's like kind of this circular. It's hard to explain, but well, hard to explain for me. But if you're on the lower or the upper, then those trickery kind of spirits are not necessarily there. When we're dealing with, let's say it's your father's spirit, right? If he's in that transitional period and so on too, still unencumbered by the physical body, but trying to work things out in there, you can actually affect that at a really meaningful way doing the ancestral healing.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
And for the most part, if somebody is channeling him and all that, you can do that yourself, especially under the right guidance.
I think that's a block for me is maybe it's the trust thing. Like, how do I know exactly who I'm channeling, or, you know, what I'm receiving and how true that is? But I think it's a block of feeling maybe safe to do it.
That's
the
piece
scary
too. Well, the thing with that is that if you're going to handle on the channeling for that, it's channeling in the higher self of your father, because it's different than what was presenting here in this life. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The highest self is safer.
And you do that. Do you set intentions before you start that this is who you want to call in?
Yeah. Or even if you're going to do something like that, I don't know if you ever heard of like theta healing. So theta healing has kind of a process where you move to what they call the seventh plane. And then from there, you set your intention, and then you come back down the planes.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm open. I'm open to that stuff. And I hope to someday learn how to do it myself. But I think I'm going through my own, you know, I have to find the space to trust myself doing it.
That's why the hard thing is to doing any of that on your own. It's super hard. I mean, I am at training assistant level for multiple modalities, but I still can't almost do it on myself. You know what I mean? Like, it's too hard to hold the space and to get the distance needed and to be able to externalize enough that I can, you know what I mean? Because in that, you have to hold your own space.
You make me think about how, if this is just my normal, you know, as the only kid, you know, seeing a parent who has done everything on her own and seeing being alone as normal and having to do your work alone as normal, you know, when that's not necessarily the case. I think maybe I still have a little bit of that programming in my head too.
Because maybe the work is actually
opening
for help
and asking for help.
Yeah, because familiar and normal doesn't necessarily mean what's been best for us. It doesn't mean it's the best thing for me right now.
Exactly.
On that one though, especially with the things you're doing, you're actually really close. You're like super close to being able to just do it on your own.
Thanks. I stopped myself with my blocks and my fears and my qualified. That was a big thing for me.
But it has nothing to do with whether you're qualified or not. It has only everything to do with, are you open? Because that's what closes the veil. What closes the veil is any judgment and stuff that comes into there. When it's just open, it's because you'll notice, I mean, have you ever have it where you're just doing something, taking a shower and doing gardening, whatever. It's like, you thought you saw him. You thought you smelled him.
Oh, I hear him.
You hear him. Exactly, right? Because you're open. You're not thinking. And then the minute you go, is that really something? And you question, then it's done, right? That piece closes. Doesn't mean that they're not there. You know, somebody's talking about something, dissociate it out. Doesn't mean they're not there anymore, right? It just meant that I just froze it out.
That's interesting. Sometimes it happens before sleep. And so I'm like, I was just zoning out.
Yeah, because you're in theta.
But you're most open You know, you let go of the judgments and the worries and all of that before you enter that new state. And that's when I receive a lot of things.
Well, that's your heavy meditative state is theta, right? So delta is deep sleep. Theta is right in between sleep and waking. So just before you fall asleep and just after you wake up, that's your meditative state. Then you go into alpha, which is kind of a calm focusedness. And then you go into beta, and then mid beta, and then high beta. High beta is full flight or fight, is freak out time, right? So those pieces just in that theta is to be able to hold it in between alpha and theta is that real meditative state. It's when you let go, then makes sense. Things can come, right? So you ever seen a monkey trap?
No.
So monkey trap is where they put a banana inside like a gourd looking like that, and they hang it. And the monkey goes in and grabs the banana. But when it grabs the banana, it freaking hand is stuck now, right? And it's hanging from this thing and swinging over there, and it can't get out. It cannot get out. And all it really needed to do was let
Lessen
go,
the grip.
pull it out, and shake that gourd. And then the banana would have come out. But we can't let go. That's where
the human brain, I think,
right?
where control is safety sometimes, and kind of owning what you can in the situation makes you feel better and safer.
It's gripped and let go. I have control, but it's actually you're not in control in that piece, right? It's a protective mechanism. You didn't watch the episode I had with Eric Rosso, did you?
No, not yet. I do really want to watch that one, though.
Are you familiar with ayahuasca?
Yes.
So you're familiar with psychedelics then?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not through personal experience, though, but I've read about it.
So in an ayahuasca ceremony, the shaman shared this story. I'll share this story with you. I think it's applicable to what we're talking about right now. So there's a little boy. He is in his village, runs across the field, and he sees an old man there. And the old man is crying and writhing with pain and holding a knife. And the boy kind of is like, what's up? So he goes to the old man. He says, old man, what's wrong? Old man says, he said, I hold this knife. I've had it for as long as I've lived. I can't even remember how I got it. But every time I use it, it cuts me and everybody around me. It causes so much pain. And the boy says, well, why don't you just get rid of it? Why don't you let it go? He goes, I can't, because what if I need it? And the boy thought about it. He says, He grabs a knife out of the man's hand. He runs back to his village because he thought he was going to be helpful. The man realized, well, I don't no longer hold this burden, moves on. Okay? 70 years later, little girl now comes across the field through the arroyo, sees that man, the boy who's now a man, holding the same knife, writhing in pain. He says, oh man, what's wrong? What are you crying about? What's your problem? And man says, I have this knife. Every time I use it, it causes so much pain. It cuts me. It cuts everybody around me. But I can't stop it. She says, well, why don't you let it go? He goes, I can't, because I might need it. And she says, I'm not sure what to do, but why don't you come back to my village and talk to my grandmother? She might be able to help you. So the old man goes with her to the village, and she sees the grandmother. And then the grandmother says, good job, granddaughter. This was not your responsibility. Go and play with your family. So she leaves. And the grandmother says, what are you dealing with? And the man says, I have this knife. Every time I use it, it cuts me. It cuts everybody around me. It causes so much pain, but I can't let it go. And grandmother says, well, I can't take it from you. But what I will do is I'll put my hands under here. And when you're ready, if you let it go, I will catch it. And he took everything inside. He let it go, finally let it go. And before it hits her hands, it turns to light and it goes everywhere.
Wow.
Right? So kind of the lesson in the story is that those burdens, all the pain, all the trauma won't cut others when you let it go. When you let it go, it turns to light and it goes everywhere and affects everyone as light. So
You're 100% true.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think with my work now, seeing people who are having their worst days can be really tough. But I think to remind myself of the transformative power of helping people let go of what they need to let go of makes it worth it.
And if they let go of theirs, what does that do for you?
It heals me in a way that I don't want to say that I feel like I had helped them or guided them to it, but it helps heal my own wounds of things that I couldn't let go of as well.
So what unmet need does it fill when you help someone else to heal in you?
The unmet need of wanting to be loved and not getting it. So I don't know if that's abandonment, maybe.
And then under that, what's the belief? The core belief that's holding you back, that's giving you the feeling.
I'm not worthy of love.
What's the youngest that was put in place? I'm not worthy of love.
I would say 6 when he left. And then again at 10 when my mom remarried. That was just
But the most original was 6?
I would say around there.
Does your body feel anything before 6? In
Not
that
that I
I'm not
can-
worthy of love.
Not that I can pull up physically. And I think as a kid, you don't realize that you have a parent who's a human dealing with their own stuff, and you're just the recipient of what they're throwing at you and judging you for and angry about.
The interesting thing is, like, when I saw your initial podcast and then you reached out to me and back and forth, a lot of times on these types of shows, I don't know why I need to be meeting somebody or so on. Maybe that was the reason.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't come to this recording thinking I was going to heal my family lines, but that's what happened. I would like to get to a space where I can just tune in, to myself, to something higher, to other people. But I think this started that. Maybe I had to clear some of this stuff first.
Yeah.
The doubt.
Well, that stuff's not even yours.
Yeah.
It's time to pass it back.
Yeah.
It's not serving anybody. It's like allowing everyone to kind of clear it. When you clear in you and you move it up the line, that piece at least is gone in everybody. You're doing work
even
for everybody.
people who are before me.
Yeah, your mom,
still
your
alive,
grandma.
and after.
Yep. When you're clearing
At
that
least
stuff
that
on
part.
and you're sending it back this way, in the ancestral healing, you would have done something kind of similar, and you'd call in a guide, and the guides will come in and help you, and you'll pass things back up the line. So you collect it and pass it like in a bag, and then your mother's higher consciousness would collect hers and send that into it, and go up and go up and go up into the light, and then it's done.
Wow.
And then it sends something back down.
Beautiful image.
And then it sends it back. It sends what you need back down. So you fill it, because otherwise it's a vacuum, it's a void.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So once one is out, then there's a void. Now you fill it with what you want. And by witnessing it, then you move it from a wave into a particle. And then that gets put into place now.
That's beautiful.
And fairly painless this way. Yeah.
I think for a long time, I have always had her voice still, holding on to.
Because it's her
doubt
voice.
And stuff. Mm-hmm.
And what happens is the daughter, there's probably some points in there where you feel like a parentified child. You're taking care of your mom. It's the roles are switched.
I feel that way now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And as a child, when you feel like that too, then you miss out on it. So then it becomes, the beliefs typically are like, I need to hold this for them, where you don't actually need to hold anything. What you can do is you can release it in you and release it in them. And then everybody gets that. I just wanted to appreciate you for coming today, give you some acknowledgement. I know that you're doing super important work, the work that a lot of people can't or won't do, although it's needed work. And I just really enjoyed spending this time with you today, understanding you and your spirit. And thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation. And my goal is to keep doing this very human work and to continue to impact people on a very soul level. So thank you.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.